not just looking at the numbers from that perspective, because it goes far beyond that. It's not just a house, it's a home.
Yeah. And maybe in that same equation, when you are talking about it, so for you, that was a draw card to stay in the property. But maybe for somebody else, it's an opportunity to say on either side, hey, I've always wanted to live in X area. And so it's an opportunity to move to a different suburb. Or maybe it's...
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics such as investing, cash flow, budgeting, saving, passive income, debt management, and much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Oh, there's a bit of extra oomph into that one, Bills.
There is a bit of extra oomph, Andrew. And for those that tuned in last week, we were talking about something that I was giving you a bit of stick for, because that's what you're entering into, the cost of raising children, right? The real cost of raising children, because you're about to have your second child. But this is what I'm going through. So it's funny how, I don't know if this
we're
is
just talking about our lives, Bills.
I don't know if
two
it's
guys
intentionally, right?
About their lives, and all of a sudden, it's turning into a podcast.
Andrew, what are we talking to everyone about today?
Well, you told me what we're talking about today. You're the one going through it, Bills.
I'm in denial. I don't want to do it. No, we're talking about the cost of renovating or relocating, right? So looking at this and going, okay, what's the financial equation behind that decision? So there's obviously a whole heap that sits behind it from an emotional and a needs-based and a wants-based perspective, but this is talking about the cost associated with it to help people. I'm trying to convince myself here, right? Trying to help people make that decision, looking at the numbers and going, okay, what's the right way for us as a family unit to go? Do we go left? Do we go right?
Did you go left or did you go right, Bills?
We've decided to stay where we are and renovate.
Yep, fair enough.
Yep. So without giving away the punchline, but Andrew, where should I start? Actually, I'm asking you now.
Well, where you should have started was speaking to your financial advisor, Andrew Nicolaou, and he would have guided you in the right direction. But instead, you try to make the decision on your own. So I guess the first thing that you need to start considering is, what are the true all-in costs of renovating versus moving?
Yeah.
And we're talking cold, hard cash here. So, what are the costs when you start to look at, builders, materials, permits, stamp duty on selling and repurchasing, agent fees, moving costs? They're the cold, hard costs that they're fixed, and that's the physical cost that's associated with putting all of this together and comparing two sides of the balance sheet. But you also need to consider the other costs.
Yeah.
The things that may not necessarily, hit your back pocket, but might hit you emotionally. What's the time out of the home? If you're renovating, can you live in the property? Do you need to, move out for a period of time? And even if it's not financially going to cost you, when maybe you don't need a rent and you can move in with a parent, what level of stress is that going to cause? The delays. I don't think I've ever seen anyone go through a building process and been like, that was magical and that was bliss.
Best experience ever.
Yeah. Never heard those words when you're talking about a renovation or when you're talking about a construction. Are there going to be, logistical nightmares when it comes to, childcare and, still need to drop kids off at school or childcare or, babysitting and moving to a different area. And so all of a sudden you need to, factor that into it. But what are all of the costs on either side to help you make an informed decision?
Whew.
It's a lot.
It's a pretty comprehensive list. No, look, you're absolutely right. And I think it's fair to say most people underestimate those costs in terms of renovations and the cost of building as well too. At least here in Melbourne, in Victoria, they're quite high and have increased quite dramatically over time. So yeah, it's one of those things that you need to be realistic that stuff's going to cost more than you think. It's going to give you more headaches because the project never ends up going as smoothly as possible. And then looking at that and going, okay, do I do that and go through all of that? Or do I just say, you know what, I'm going to go and pay for whatever it is, pay stamp duty, all of the other stuff that we're talking about, buy a place that's already done, and then at least I know what my cost is, because I know what the purchase price is, or I know what I'm going to go up to, and that's the end of it. It's not going to extend. It's not going to run out. And the day that I get those keys, that's mine. I don't have to muck around with any of that too. So yeah, there's an argument for both sides of it, at least from that perspective. But pivoting into the equity that this can create as well too. So transaction costs are ridiculously expensive. Sell your property, you're going to pay a real estate agent, percentage-based fee. Don't ask me why the percentage-based fee has stayed the same. Don't know. Maybe that's another podcast altogether. Not wanting to pee off our real estate agent friends. Stamp duty is another one. Same sort of thing. Percentage-based fee. So the government gets a free kick for people transferring property for no reason. Those costs are really expensive, right? So thinking about that as a sunk cost, and this is one of the things that I went through with this decision and going, okay, there's money on the table that I know that's just going to disappear on paper shuffling, right? When I can take that money and I can go and renovate and build something tangible, right? Then that transfers across to the equity question. Are all renovations or improvements the same?
Absolutely not. I mean, and that's the other side of the equation, in that, okay, on one side you've got, these are sunk costs that are not actually going to improve any value. So you can, sell your property and go through all of the transaction costs that are associated with it. That transaction creates zero equity in the property, improves the property's value by, quite frankly, zero. And so you then say, okay, well, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to use that money that I otherwise would have spent in transaction costs towards improving the value of the property in renovation. Mm-hmm. Now, a renovation can improve the value of the property and the equity in the property. And generally speaking, it should, if done correctly, improve the value of the property more than the costs that are associated with doing it. And there's a pretty simple reason for it. And it's because, let's say someone is buying a $1 million property and they need another $100,000 for renovations. Yes. In order for someone to do that, I'm going to exclude stamp duty just for simplicity in this scenario. They need a 20% deposit. So they need $200,000. They will buy the property, do $100,000 of renovations, all in cost of $300,000. Mm-hmm. Versus someone buys a property that's already renovated to the spec that they want. Now, if they buy a property for even, let's say, $1.2 million, so we're talking an extra $100,000 above your, $1 million and $100,000 renovation. You buy a property for $1.2 million, the deposit that's required for that on a 20% deposit is $140,000. So because you're funding a portion of the renovation costs with the bank versus funding the renovation costs on your own and out of your own pocket, buyers tend to be able to spend more on a renovated property and are more willing to spend on a renovated property because they don't have to fund all of the costs. They can borrow some of the money, and they also don't need to go through the headache that's associated with it. Yeah. So that's, yes, it can improve the value of, the property. However, if you're just doing renovations that, don't necessarily improve the property, but are just improving or just altering the taste of the property, in that, there isn't necessarily an objective improvement. It's just I'm converting it into something that's more my style. Yeah. It's not to say that you don't do it, but that may not necessarily increase the value of the property. That's only going to increase, the lifestyle enjoyment of the property. Yeah. And you can overcapitalize. You can put too much renovations into a property where a buyer is not necessarily willing to spend more for it. So you do need to consider, if you're doing it or if you're looking at things from a financial perspective, is what I'm doing actually going to improve the equity position? Or is this just merely, altering the property from a lifestyle enjoyment aspect?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. I think a real simple one of that is, are we just shuffling things around internally, or are we adding an extra bedroom or extra bathroom or improving the floor plan or whatever it may be? Coupling that with purchasing a new property, just thinking about relocating potentially to a a suburb or a location or even a land component that's going to create larger capital gain as well too. So getting that balance right, because generally speaking, we're talking about this, it's fairly obvious, but from an owner-occupier perspective, right? So your main consideration, firstly, I think is the utility and the enjoyment that you get from the property. And then as a secondary consideration, no less important, but are we going to experience capital growth? So looking at that and going, okay, if you're in an area or a particular position that's not going to give you the same opportunity, then that probably then pushes more into the column of relocating versus renovating as well too. So that's something else to take into consideration. But cash flow versus borrowing power, what does this look like? Can you afford it? Because at some particular point in time, this is going to cost more money, regardless of whether you go left, whether you go right. What does it look like? Can you afford it? What's the impact that it's going to have on your borrowing capacity? What's the cash flow ramifications? Do you need a construction loan to value ratio? All of this stuff that we need to think about, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, you need to think about it in the instance of, I guess the first step is, can we do it from start to finish, right? And
does this not run out of money, you mean?
Well, I guess the first point is, okay, from at the moment, let's say we have a property, we want to renovate the property for argument's sake. And that's going to entail us going from, $1 million in debt to 1.2. Okay. Start to finish, you can afford it, right? You can afford the repayments on $1 million. You can afford the repayment on 1.2. The difficulty is, can you afford it in the middle? Can you afford it during the construction process? If you need to move out of that property and rent, are you going to be able to pay your mortgage, also pay rent, and still do all of the other things that you're doing, or what's going to fall to the wayside? Or is it, there's a mechanism to be able to move in with family? So you need to consider start point, end point, but also the middle point in how do we actually fund all of this while everything is happening at the same time? And maybe you've got enough money to fund the renovation or the construction for 12 months. But if that process blows out to 18 months or 24 months because you've hit variations or you hit stumbling blocks or something's happened or costs have risen, how close to the line are you? And is this actually feasible, or are you taking on too much risk? And in that instance, maybe your only option is sale and purchase as opposed to, going through the renovation process. So you need to be able to make sure that you can fund it all the way through. You've got, risk mitigation mechanisms at play, and what's the end value of the property going to be? What's our LVR going to be? At the end and during the process, how do we actually fund it? Do we fund it out of our own physical cash, or is there a construction loan, or is there a top up on our mortgage? Like, what's going to be the mechanism to be able to make all of this work? Or if you are selling and purchasing, is it a bridging finance? What do you do from there's risk in that, can you make that process work in a timely manner as well?
Yeah, lot to consider. And sort of coming back full circle to what I was talking about at the start, it's that level of uncertainty with renovating versus purchasing. Because when you purchase, it's, what the cost is.
Yeah.
Right. It's that, unless you get into the house and something's wrong with it or what have you, but ordinarily speaking. So I think your tolerance and financial position for uncertainty definitely plays a huge role. Just changing tact slightly. So thinking about this in a different sense, and from our own personal experience, this is what it came down to. But money isn't the only variable that we took into consideration. So from our perspective, we stoked in terms of where we live. Close to the schools that our kids go to, community, parkland, public transport. It just ticks so many boxes for us. The space that, we've got a home office, there's room for the kids. So long-term livability was that thing. And we thought, yep, this is great. It's going to be really difficult to try and replicate this. And all of those things, how do you put a tangible dollar value on that? It goes a lot further than dollars. So I guess that's a benefit, but it's also the difficult part of trying to estimate or make a decision as to which way you go with this, because it's not just comparing, like, it's not necessarily a dollar equation. It's not just the dollars associated with it. Yeah, sure. That's everything else with it as well too. So, look through that lifestyle and livability, because ultimately, I mean, life is for living, right? So you need to be enjoying where you're at, what you're doing, and not just looking at the numbers from that perspective, because it goes far beyond that. It's not just a house, it's a home.
Yeah. And maybe in that same equation, when you are talking about it, so for you, that was a draw card to stay in the property. But maybe for somebody else, it's an opportunity to say on either side, hey, I've always wanted to live in X area. And so it's an opportunity to move to a different suburb. Or maybe it's a, hey, you know what, we've reassessed and we can probably move 1 or 2 suburbs further out, which doesn't impact our lifestyle, but that gives us an opportunity to downsize maybe the area from a value perspective, but upsize the property from a property perspective. So starting to think about, hey, what are the other levers and variables that I can pull to potentially not impact us financially, but still positively impact us from a lifestyle and livability side of things.
Yeah. Yep. Can't downplay it. We spoke a little bit about things that can go wrong. I mean, really the renovation and construction costs, I don't think in any circumstance that I've ever seen has it come in, at least initially, on budget, right? It's always plus a little bit, plus a little bit, plus a little bit. And especially if you run into issues along the way. So you do need to have provisions in place and anticipate that that's going to be the case to then be able to say, okay, yes, we can deal with it. Because the worst possible position that you can get yourself in is you pull a trigger on doing renovations and then you hit a problem or a cost overrun and then you can't complete the project. So you're stuck kind of in this no man's land in the middle. The other thing too, keeping in mind with builder insolvency. So this is a really big thing that we're seeing in the environment at the moment, is if that's the case and they're halfway through the project and the builder falls over, trying to get somebody in place to do that. Council approvals can be difficult at times, structural issues, whole range of different things that can go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And then same story when you're then looking at relocation as well. So when you're buying and selling, what's, how do you actually do it and what risk do you take on? I mean, you can sell first and then buy the property afterwards. And the benefit of that is you know what money you have, so you know how much you can spend on the purchase. The risk is where do you live in the meanwhile?
Yep.
If you sell your owner-occupied property first, or, you can try to extend settlement for a longer period of time to give yourself more room there. The risk there is that, what if you don't find another property in time? Are you, bidding more because you just need to get into something on the purchase? And then on the flip side, it's if you buy first, then all of a sudden you've got the pressure on the sale to make that happen. And all of a sudden that could mean that you accept a lower price than you otherwise would have if you, held out. And what happens if you don't sell and you don't get an offer? And can you afford to keep both properties? If you then look at bridging finance, what are the costs that are associated with it? Can you afford it? Is that an option for you? So relocating can be a very significant risk as well. So on either side, I think that the important thing is get advice, make sure that it's within your means, make sure that you can afford it from a cash flow side of things, make sure that, from a timing perspective, it's the right timing, that you've got, certainty on your income, that you can make all of this work and that you're reducing the risk as much as you possibly can is important, because the risks and the ramifications, if it goes wrong, can be hugely significant.
Yep. Tax considerations, Andrew. So obviously with an owner-occupier, principal place of residence, there's no capital gains tax, which is fantastic. So
unless there was, and sometimes people forget, I rented this property out for a couple of years before I moved in. So, make sure that there is actually no capital gains.
Yes. Assuming that it hadn't been rented and it was your owner occupier and principal residence, all of that upside that you're putting money into the property, at some stage when it does get sold, it's not going to attract capital under normal scenario if it's your owner occupier. So that's a huge advantage associated with that. So one of the things that we do see Well, from a wealth creation perspective in Australia, as people spend money on their owner occupier, they then sell it, no capital gains tax, move into another one, rinse and repeat the process. Really popular with builders as well too, who can, do this stuff at speed and at a lower cost point because they've got the expertise. So keeping in mind the tax consequences. The overcapitalization risk, yes, can't downplay that more than enough, and needing to make sure that you're comfortable with how long it's going to take to recoup that money. There's also the rent vesting angle as well, too. That triggers a different ownership structure completely as well. But that's probably another one that we haven't spoken about. But break-even timeline, Andrew, how long is it going to take if you go and spend this? How long is it going to take before you get your money back? That's a really good question.
So that's a question that you really need to ask, in that, if you go through this process, is it going to make financial sense? Or is it, for argument's sake, kids are 15 years old.
Yep.
They're probably, only going to need a larger home and a larger space and all of this stuff for a defined period of time. If you're going to be going through this expense only to then be going through that expense, if you're going through the expense to upsize to then, go through the expense to downsize in the near future, you may not have enough time in order for this to make financial sense. Or maybe it's, this is another way for us to build equity and we're going to downsize in 15, 20 years, and all of a sudden you've got the ability to, really make this work, but understand how long your break-even point is expected to be, and whether, a renovation is going to be a sunk cost, or whether a purchase is going to be a sunk cost, or whether it's actually going to add value to you, your budget, your lifestyle, and your wealth plan.
A lot to think about.
Absolutely. Billy's already been through it, so he knows absolutely all of this. So if you need to speak to someone about whether you should be, renovating, relocating, getting advice for it, why not speak to the financial advisor that's done it for himself?
Quickly becoming the expert in the building trade, you reckon, Andrew? But to our listeners and our viewers, hopefully there was a whole heap of value in that. If you want more information, reach out to me specifically, because I'm going through it at the moment. But no, as always, details are in the show notes. Andrew, thank you for today.
Thanks very much, and we look forward to catching you on the next podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about, or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au. The information in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should consider whether the information is appropriate to your circumstances and seek professional advice before acting on any of the information provided. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of Akumin Financial Planning Pty Ltd.